So welcome everyone to our second webinar of the summer. My name is Tony Casenario. I'm the Director of Recruitment for Willamette University's MBA programs. I'm here with my team, Nate Nagy, Alex Salazar, and Marley Nicasio. And we're fortunate tonight to have another guest speaker. Professor Jon Thompson will be with us this evening. He spoke at our first one. For those of you that were able to listen back in May, he talked about information economics. Tonight, his talk is going to be on influencing political processes on behalf of your enterprise. Very fortunate again to have him here with us. Professor Thompson is an associate professor of economics here at Willamette University. He's got his PhD in econ from the University of Oregon, as well as his master's from econ at the University of Oregon. And he's a Willamette Bearcat undergraduate alum. And so we're very excited to have him here. He was also voted by our students this year as Faculty Member of the Year. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the torch to Professor Thompson and looking forward to his talk tonight. Thank you, Professor.
Well, thank you, Tony. I'm not sure I deserve it, but thank you very much. So I'm just going to be talking for a few moments today, about 15 minutes. There we go. About what we cover in our courses related to influencing political processes on behalf of your enterprise. So the real structure of this, the real purpose of it is for you to think about this question of how do I pitch what my enterprise wants as what some decision maker in government should also want. And so what that's going to mean is you're going to identify some kind of target you want to influence. You're going to explain clearly what you want, because you don't just want them to have a positive opinion of you or your enterprise and then have no sort of action item. And then you're going to want to explain why what it is that your enterprise wants is what they should want as well. I've actually had students describe this process, this structure, as being somewhat similar to, marketing in an attempt to influence politicians or bureaucrats to want what your enterprise wants. And there's some truth to that. It's a little simplified, but there's some truth to that. What we have to do to get there is to think about what it is you want and then what it is that they want once you have a target. Okay, so I will quickly point out that sometimes I get students saying that they're not interested in influencing political processes, government activity, very reasonably, because they say they're not interested in working for government. They're not interested in working in government. I have complete sympathy with that. That's not really the purpose of this. What we want to focus on is working outside of government. How do you get government to work for you? So the first thing I would highlight is the outcomes of government decisions. They matter across all disciplines. Doesn't matter if you're in finance, doesn't matter if you're in accounting. If you're in quantitative methods, it is going to matter what information, for example, is collected by the census and then is either distributed or not distributed publicly and globally. It doesn't really matter what your discipline is. It is going to be influenced by government decisions. The other thing I would point out is it doesn't matter if you're in for-profit, not-for-profit, or some level of government. Other levels of government are going to make decisions, are going to set rules that matter for your enterprise. So I have three quick examples at the bottom here. One is local. It's a few years old. SIC Processing was a semiconductor slurry manufacturer located, in basically part of Portland. And they got this fairly nice little tax break from the state for opening a new facility. A condition of the tax break was that they continue operation without breaks of more than 6 months permanently. And if they ever stopped operation for 6 months or more, they would owe all of the taxes that they had, received relief on over the last 6 months. Well, they actually shut down operations for, something like 6 months. And they ended up essentially getting shut down. And the issue there was they misunderstood, and this was big enough to shut down the entire enterprise, at least their operations in Oregon. They misunderstood what the state had meant by 6 months. They argued it was less than 6 months because it was less than 6 months of working days. So they included weekends and holidays and said, hey, it's less than 6 months. And the state said, no, it's calendar. 6 months on the calendar, you weren't working. You have to pay back all that we essentially gave you in tax relief. Not for profit, you have a nice little example of Prevena Medical in Chicago. They were providing, they're a nonprofit medical provider. They rented at cost, not to make money, at cost, some of their resources to a for-profit medical provider, some beds for excess use. And that actually meant that they lost their not-for-profit status. And that meant the fact that they had extra cash this year meant that it was taxed as corporate income, even though they had no intention of dispersing it to shareholders or stockholders or investors. They didn't understand their requirements as a nonprofit. And so they got hit really hard as a result of that. And then finally, Gig City was this really big investment made by a city in Tennessee to try and provide really high-speed broadband internet at the municipal level, so municipal utility. And they were essentially told by the FCC they could do that, but the state government said they couldn't. And that went back and forth in a series of court cases that dragged on for almost 8 years. And in the end, they, I believe, ended up not being able to provide the service. But that was something the city spent a substantial portion of their revenue on for several years, figuring that this was a great opportunity to grow the city economy without considering the fact that the feds and the state would have a say over whether or not the city could actually provide this service. The last thing I'll point out about why you should care is the details always matter. They matter a lot. I'll give you a very quick example of this. You think about something like cap and trade for carbon emissions or a carbon tax. Those things are likely, very likely, in fact, going to either happen or not happen on the basis of politics that go way above the level of what your enterprise can influence. But the details of how they are implemented, if they are, those are things your enterprise could influence. In theory, right, we talk about a carbon tax as being very, very simple. You tax carbon. But in reality, there are always going to be enterprises, activities that are exempt, and then there are going to be questions. Are we talking about taxing carbon in gross or net terms? Something like a farm produces a lot of gross carbon output, but they also reabsorb a lot of carbon. So are they paying on the gross or are they paying on the net? Those details are going to fit inside of a policy too big for you to either stop or create on your own, but you could influence how those details are rolled out. Okay. In terms of influencing political processes, obviously most people immediately go to the legislative process. Nothing wrong with that, although it's not really my focus. The legislative process is important. When you think about the legislative process, you have to say, first of all, what are the incentives that the people you're trying to influence, the agents, in this case, legislators, what are the incentives that they have? The vast majority of them, their incentives are related to, at least in the US, representing people within a geographic district or within a state. And so you have to say, well, what is it that I can argue is good for the people in their district or in their state? Then you have to think, who is it that actually matters, right? We could talk about people in different, let's say, in the Oregon House of Representatives. We can talk about those people. Which one do we want to focus on? Which is most important to try and capture first? Well, what we're going to say is like, well, we should be focusing on the people who have outsized power. In theory, on the floor, they have equal votes. In practice, some of them have either access to committees and subcommittees, or they are chairs of committees and subcommittees, which is going to give them a lot of power to either support the things that we like or oppose the things that we don't like. So we want to think about how can we target the right people? How can we pitch what we want as being good given their incentive structure? That being said, frequently when we talk about lobbying, what we talk about is how that influence actually occurs. And I have United Technologies up here for two reasons. One, I had a student who worked for United Technologies. They told me all about this. This was neat. This was before United Technologies merged with Raytheon. Back then, they were paying low seven figures to a guy who was just golfing regularly in Washington, D.C. That's what he did. He golfed in D.C. And then every month they rang him up and they said, did you get to golf with any senators or Congress people this year or this month? And if he said no, they said, well, try harder next month, please. And then they would do it over and over again, right? That is what a lot of people think of when they think of lobbying, paying usually a lot of money to have access. And then I have this other thing up here just to say, when we talk about people who are worth targeting, it's frequently the case that one person has outsized control. In the case of Joe Manchin, 2 years ago now, he had a lot of control, he had a lot of power because he was the pivot in the US Senate. And therefore, if you wanted to get almost anything done, he was the last vote you needed if you actually wanted to win. So he got a lot of things that he wanted. Now, something that I like, frankly, a little bit more than the legislative process is talking about bureaucratic procedures, bureaucratic processes, agencies, regulatory and administrative agencies. The first thing is to think, okay, agencies have agents inside them, people. What is it that the people actually want? What is it that the people actually desire? And that is going to be based, at least in part, off of the structure of the agency they're inside of. So if you have an agency where the head is, let's say, elected, if the head is appointed by the governor, if the head is promoted from within, those three different agencies, the head is going to have different incentives. If the person is elected, they're going to be responding to the electorate. If the person is selected, they're going to be responding to the selectorate, that is whoever appointed them. And then if the person is promoted from within the agency, they're going to be kind of representing agency values. But those three things, those three structures are going to change the incentives that those guys are going to have. And then I like to always point out, there's a very clean, very clear-cut way to interact with regulatory activity in the form of bureaucratic procedures. Almost all regulatory changes have to go through a set structure for administrative procedures. Part of that is the open comment period. And I have two examples, both of which actually are kind of local, and I like both of them. The first is Garmin. One of the things Garmin does, right, is they make avionic equipment for light aircraft. A few years ago, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, basically proposed a new set of rules that would have pretty much wiped out a big chunk of the light aircraft, private, small aircraft market, because it would have meant it was very difficult for smaller aircraft to take off from or land at big airports. This is something big airlines have been pushing for years, because they want their 747s going in and out of those airports without having to worry about small aircraft. What Garmin did is they used the open comment period, they used their customer list, and they mobilized their customer list to go out and write comments saying that they hated this proposed rule change. And the FAA removed the rule. All right, so they proposed it, They got negative comments, they pulled it back. They just said, okay, we're not doing it. The other, which also uses the FAA, which is a little weird, but I think it's a nice example, is a few years ago, there was a drone manufacturer, and unfortunately, I'm not allowed to say the name, drone manufacturer that used the open comment period to essentially tell the FAA, here is the optimum size for a drone for delivery purposes, right? So Amazon and a bunch of other enterprises want to use drones to pick up packages, drop them off at your house. That's kind of terrifying or whatever, but it's probably the future. And so there was this question, how big should they be? Well, the FAA doesn't want them to be too big because people are going to freak out if you have a crash with a really big drone. If they're too small, they probably can't pick up the packages, so you need some kind of intermediate. What this drone manufacturer did is they made a pitch that the optimum size happened to be the size they were currently producing. And the FAA accepted that comment, went with that size as the new rule for these delivery drones. And now that drone manufacturer has a big advantage because they were already building exactly the size that is the maximum the FAA will allow. We get to my favorite, which is judicial processes. Okay, so the legal system. And this is really very different than the other two. The other two are the legislative, the bureaucratic structures. Those are created by a very conscious decision to create these decision-making bodies. Courts are different. Courts kind of have evolved in a weirder way. They have a deeper history, and what they do is they try and adjudicate these conflicts between parties. So when we have something like a potential liability, we want to think, what could generate liability? How do we think about liability? What is it that inside of the courts, contracts are really able to allow us to do? What is it that contracts can't really do? When does it make sense to engage in settlement, even if you don't think you did anything wrong? I'll give you a really quick example of that one. Okay, just today or the last day, Microsoft pays this money for illegally collecting children's personal data. That headline is actually not quite right. And the reason I say that is they settled, but they settled without admitting fault. What that actually means is, one, they don't have to pay any legal fees. They're done. And two, they can treat that as an ordinary business expense. So, in fact, they actually, if they have corporate income tax, right, that reduces to some extent their corporate income tax liability. Therefore, there's a fairly strong incentive to settle if you think there's a chance you could lose, even if you think there's a good chance you wouldn't lose. Thinking about that math, thinking about when it makes sense, that's part of what we're talking about here in interacting with the legal system. Finally, the judicial system itself is built off of this process of generating precedent. Precedent means the courts, in some sense, are creating what we can think of as a kind of law that binds future activities. For that reason, precedent generated from court cases matters outside of those cases. For that reason, there's this really common thing called the friend of the court brief, amicus curiae, where people who are outside of a court case, not affected by it directly, submit written memos saying, here's what I think, here's why you should rule this way or that way. And they try and influence the decision of the court to set precedent that will help them in the future. And that has become incredibly common at the appellate level and the Supreme Court these days. Quick example, this is actually an amicus brief generated on behalf of Michigan counties, arguing that Minnesota counties are not violating the Constitution with their structure for levying fines against people who aren't paying their taxes, right? So this is, one state is essentially being told potentially by the federal government, you can't do this with the fines on people who don't pay taxes. and another state is writing a memo saying, actually, that makes a lot of sense. They can do that. Here's why. This happens all the time. Alphabet, Google, sorry, is doing this all the time. Amazon, Apple, they have begun writing these related to almost every tech case out there. And it's a fairly low cost mechanism for you to try and influence important precedent-setting cases influencing your enterprise. That being said, it's pretty reasonable for you to say, and I actually use this example for that reason, okay, that's cool, but I can't afford 7 figures a month on a guy who plays golf who might not actually do anything for me. That's actually not something my enterprise can do. That's fair. My response would be almost anyone can still engage in some kind of organization, collective action by industry or by location to try and get what you as an industry want. Quick example, US Tire Manufacturers Association is a bunch of tire manufacturers who get together and lobby for the same things that are good for what they think of as the industry. The other thing I would point out is perhaps the most important thing that happens in what we might broadly call lobbying and trying to influence political processes is not paying the guy 7 figures to golf. It's actually just generating a sales pitch. All right, so when I worked, and I did work briefly for the University of Oregon in their legislative lobbying arm, and when I worked in nonprofit legislative lobbying, what I saw every time is we would just generate these data packets. We would identify a target, a legislator we wanted to influence. We would generate a data packet saying why what we did was good according to the values of whoever we were trying to influence. Really, really quick example. If somebody said, we care about gender parity in tech, we would generate a piece of information that said, we're pretty good on that dimension, and we would give it to the person we were trying to influence. And then that would be something they could use as a sales packet to basically argue for us, argue for why funding us was a good thing. I have a quick example here. Back when Kate Brown, former governor, was Secretary of State, one of her big concerns was high-speed internet in rural areas. Well, when AOL Time Warner and Comcast were thinking about merging, they didn't have to spend a fortune to get her on their side. What they did is they sent her a piece of material, an argument saying, our merger will help expand access to rural high-speed internet. It doesn't really matter if you believe that or not. That's not really the point. The point is they put together what the target wanted with what they wanted, made them seem like they dovetailed, and that made the target want what they wanted, made the target repeat their sales pitch for what they wanted. And then the last thing I'll point out here is, even if you really can't influence the process, studying the structure can still be valuable if it helps you make predictions about what is coming down the pipeline. If you can see what's coming, it might be very valuable, even if it ends up being the case that you can't predict it. With that said, I did want to very quickly make this point. I'm actually not likely going to be teaching the public politics course in the MBAP within the next year or two. So I wanted to point out who is going to be doing it. We have Tim Johnson, who's amazing. He's the Elmer Gowdy Distinguished Chair and the Director for the Center for Public Governance. And we also have Brad Avakian, who's formerly of the Oregon House, the Oregon Senate, and Oregon Labor Commissioner for over 10 years. So I think that's pretty impressive. And with that, I think I will turn it back over to tonight's professionals. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. That was amazing. So that was great. I think we could all use a little advice on how to do some influencing in our daily lives. So I appreciate that. So thank you again for everyone who's here and for everyone who is watching this as we record it. we kind of are going to move along. And so I'm going to just briefly talk about what these webinars are about for those of you that have joined a little bit late. So tonight's webinar, the theme was Thrive, Not Survive, how to make going to school work for you. And in these webinars, we also would love to invite our professors, have them kind of talk about something that interests them, that they're passionate about maybe, or something that maybe gets discussed in class, so that prospective students, you kind of have an idea, topics that are going to be discussed. And so Professor Thompson was graced us twice now to give a couple talks, so we really appreciate that. And so Alex, if we can move on to our next slide. And what I wanted to let everybody know is that we're going to talk a little bit here. My name is Tony Castanerio. Again, I'm the director of recruitment for the MBA programs, but we're going to go ahead at the very end and allow for questions. So Professor Thompson will be here if anybody has a question for him as well. So now our first slide here, making your time work for you. And so I actually am an alum of Willamette's MBA for Professionals program, and I went back to school in my 40s with 3 children, and I had a 1-year-old at the time, a 3-year-old, and a 5, almost 6-year-old. And so what I kind of wanted to talk about in my slide and my brief talk for everyone is that you can do this at any stage in life, and we're going to kind of show that with some of our recruiters that are here, is that I did this going back to school, having 3 kids, working full time. And how do you do it? How do you go back to school and manage your time and, be a good parent, be a good spouse, be a great coworker, all the things that you are wearing, all the different hats. And what you need to do is be able to list out what's important in your life, and for me, it was pretty easy. Family was important. I have this kind of picture here of Mr. Mom, and, that was kind of, no matter what, I was going to be good at being a dad, and I was going to be good at being a husband and doing all the things I needed to do at home. And so when I was at home, when I was at my son's event, at a school event, or if they were singing, my little guys at the time, it's like I wasn't on the phone, I wasn't texting, I wasn't studying, I was all in. I was paying attention, I was taking pictures, and that was that is what I promised myself. No matter what I did and I added to my plate, and school was definitely something that was an addition to my plate, I was still going to be there for everything at home. And so I think part of being successful in anything that you do is you finding that way to manage what's important in your life. And if it's important, you're going to make time for it. And so for me, school was important, family was important, my job was important, and I was going to have to find a way to kind of separate those things. And when I was doing them, I was all in. And so I think that's important for students to know. When you're busy, if you're going back to school, if you do have a lot of other commitments, you're going to have to budget your time, and you're going to have to be there for those things. And if it's important to you, you will find a way to make it work. I promise you. I tell folks all the time that if I can go back and do it, especially with that 1-year-old, and it wasn't easy, you can do this too. And so if you're looking at going back to school and those are some concerns, or I kind of, things that I'm saying, you can kind of relate to, well, then, another example for me, when I went back, I had to identify where my support was, and where I could lean on people when I needed help. And so definitely I had to lean on my family. I had to lean on my classmates, my professors. I think the hardest part about going back to school as a professional is you kind of put a lot of pressure on yourself that you have to know everything. And the reality is you don't. And I got over that real quick early on, that I was going to need to lean on my classmates, lean on the people that could support me. And I think the more you're able to do that, and the earlier you can kind of get over that fact that you don't have to know everything. That's why you're going back to school, and really lean on the people that can help you. It's going to help you out in the long run, and it's going to make things a lot easier for you. And then also, what I tell folks that are looking at going back to school that maybe do have a lot of commitments is, hey, strive for excellence, but not for perfection. And our professors told me from day one, it's not your GPA that matters. It's what you learn and what you can go and take from the classroom and actually utilize. And so I was less focused about having a 4.0 and having all A's, and more about, okay, what's the most important thing that I can take away, and what can I actually use? And don't get me wrong, there was a lot that I wanted to dive into. And what's funny is I have a lot of notes and things that I took during class that I was not able to probably dive into as much then, but I always go back now and I'm able to open my notes, open my binders and look at old things that I went over. And so I graduated in 2020. Again, I didn't focus so much on my GPA as much as what could I learn, what could I use? And that's what I tell folks. Take away from the program what you can, do the best you can, but give yourself a break. If you have a lot of commitments, if you have a big family, you have a lot of responsibilities at your work, it's okay. And it's okay not to be perfect, but you're definitely going to learn something in this program. You're going to come away with a new skill set, and you're going to meet a lot of great people and have a lot of contacts when you're all done. And that's part of this as well, is that you have to find the balance of what you need to take from the program. For some people, it's the networking part of this. For some people, it's the skill set. For others, it's, they're trying to do, climb the ladder, get a promotion, whatever it may be. You can take something from the program, you can utilize it, you can be successful. So I'm just an example. I wanted to kind of talk my story, show you that you can prioritize your priorities, list out what's important to you. You can be successful no matter how busy you are. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass the torch here to our next recruiter, who's also been through the MBA program and can tell their story a little bit.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My internet is kind of unstable right now, but I'm going to get through this slide. So I'm Marley. I'm actually a recent graduate of our early career program, but the lovely thing is there's a lot of parallels between early career and the professionals program. And one of those things is to not worry about your past major. I think that was my biggest hesitation when applying to the program. I was a biology undergrad and I totally had a different pathway plan for myself. But one thing about getting an MBA is it's applicable across the board, and it doesn't really matter what you're coming in with as your undergraduate background, because this program is designed for people with no prior business school background. And so you could just come into this program and you'll learn basically from the ground up about all different parts of business. And that was the beauty of it. I was obviously very heavy in the sciences, so this program was perfect and geared towards people like me who needed to learn a lot about everything business has to offer. And then another beautiful thing about this program is we have very supportive and available professors. If you're not confident in a certain class, professors have office hours and are very easily available to make appointments with. And that's one thing that I was able to take advantage of through my time in the program, because I wasn't very good at accounting. And that was one of my things that I needed to go to extra tutoring hours for. So that's a great resource to have. And then cohorts are super helpful. Being a professional, I'm sure that cohort is a lot smaller than my 50 people. And those people that you have classes with is going to be super nice to do homework with and maybe study, bounce questions off of each other. So you're not in this alone, and worrying about your past major is definitely not something to really stress over, because we're here for you. I'm going to pass the torch now to Alex about tips and tricks for the program.
Thank you, Marley. Just have to make sure I was unmuted. And thank you guys for being here. So just kind of continuing along, one of the assistant directors, myself, and also an alumni of the program. So I come from a different perspective than either Tony or Marley. My biggest recommendations are to not beat yourself up, especially during that first term. You're going to come in and there's going to be an adjustment period, and you're going to find your own rhythm. Slowly but surely, you'll fall into that. With that, I really encourage you to kind of chat with your professors and your cohort members, see kind of what strategies have worked in the past, read up on the syllabus, have an idea for what the roadmap of the term looks like, and slowly but surely begin to adjust. And again, don't take it harsh or personally if you don't nail it that first week, right? If you don't feel like you've nailed down your routine just yet, that's okay. Leading to that third point, find a routine that works for you. And that might look different, right? If you, like Tony, have kids and other commitments, a family, versus someone that might be on the younger end early on in their career with maybe perhaps a little bit more free time, but maybe huge commitments at work. Those things are going to look different for every person. That's totally okay. Just take what you can, those useful skills from other cohort members that might already have settled in a little bit more quickly, there's nothing wrong with that. That first term, hey, even that first 2 terms, that's exactly what it's all about. Just getting your footing in and really finding something that works for you. And lastly is just time management. That all kind of builds into it, but also being willing to be flexible with that. Some terms are going to be a little bit more straightforward for you versus others are going to require a little bit more attention, a little more due diligence, and that's perfectly okay. There's going to be some ebbs and flows, but if you're encountering some challenges, that's good because you're learning something new and you're all going through it together. So having that support system, being flexible, but again, maintaining some aspect of time management within that. And again, just finding a routine that works for you, that's dynamic throughout the process. Those are my biggest tips and tricks for it. And then I'll pass it along to Nate.
Hey guys, I'm Nate. I'm an assistant director of recruitment. I'm in the program right now as well in my 3rd semester, so I'm almost halfway through. And I had a bachelor's of English from a university in 1999. So, hey, just really quick, wanted to talk about the application process. A lot of people might look at this and look at the whole pie. And what I'm going to try to do in a couple of minutes is just break it up. And as you hopefully will see, that it's simple. I think it's pretty straightforward. And what's best about working at Willamette and with the MBA program, because we're a smaller university, you're going to have a recruiter working with you every step of the way. And so, whether there's questions or concerns that come up along with this process, with the application process, you're going to have one of us to talk with and to make sure that you're on the right track. The other thing I'll mention too with the application is we can move as quickly as you want to. I've had some people who I do a consult with on a Monday, and basically in the next 2 days, they have everything in and everything done, and we can go ahead and send them to the admissions committee. And that's what I really like, is we're able to move as slowly as you'd like, but also as quickly, which is nice. The application's free. It's online. And at the end of the day, what you can do once you create your username and password, if you just uploaded your resume and had nothing else, we're able to schedule your admissions interview, which is a big part of the application process. Every single applicant gets interviewed by our associate dean, Alex Subert. He's fantastic. He's been here over a decade. And really what that's going to be is just a conversation that he's going to have with you one-on-one. And those last 20 to 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how the conversation goes. And it's really going to be him finding out about why an MBA, why Willamette, and what might you want to do with that. After the interview, you're 75 to 80% of the way there. We require 2 references, which you can enter, and our system will automatically send them the pertinent material. The other thing people get hung up on a little bit is an essay, and really good managers are clear and concise. We don't need 17 pages of essay. We're looking for 500 words of really about why Willamette, why an MBA, and telling your story a little bit. Also, other people look at the GMAT or the GRE as a requirement. We offer waivers for that, and that's an open conversation that the recruiter you're working with is going to be able to have with you. And we really take a holistic approach to the way that we view our applicants. Yes, with transcripts, we'll require those, although we're able to move forward with the application process with unofficial transcripts. But the farther you're out of college or out of school, and the more time you spend in the workforce, that's what's more important to us. And so really, if you looked at this in total, it might look like a barrier, and it's really not. They're just little slices of pie that we need to take one step at a time, and you're going to have a person working personally with you every step of the way to make it manageable. But it is simple, and I've had people apply on a Monday, get accepted, and get a financial aid package by that Friday. So hopefully that helps with the process a little bit. Tony, I'll pass it off to you.
Oh, I think you're muted, Tony.
Yep, sorry about that. I was talking to myself there. So I wanted to basically touch base a little bit about partnerships, scholarships, and cost of the education. A lot of people will go and look at our sticker price, and they're very concerned about costs, and we understand that. We do have a lot of scholarships that we offer for students. So It's usually built into the actual application. We have one separate scholarship for folks that work for not-for-profits that they would actually apply for. But we have some really outstanding scholarships and partnerships. So the reason why we put these slides on is that we're constantly trying to build partnerships with different organizations, and whether they're large organizations or small organizations, our preferred partnerships, if that's something your organization wants to do, allows us to offer even more discounts to students, as well as people that work for the state of Oregon, folks that work for not-for-profits. So what I would say is ask your recruiter. Let's talk about scholarships. Let's talk about what opportunities are out there. We want this to be affordable. And to be honest, we're very, very competitive in this market, whether we're competing against University of Oregon, Oregon State, Portland State. We feel that we can compete against any of them in price, but definitely in the quality of our education. We're accredited by the AACSB, and we are an in-person cohort. We're not an online model. So you're going to get the most out of this kind of a program. So if you can go to the next slide there, Salazar, I just kind of want to plug our next events. We kind of have some save the dates here. So we are putting on 3 total webinars. This is the second webinar of the summer. We have one more webinar coming up on July 19th, and that one's going to be great as well. It's going to be about outcomes. We're inviting some alums to come on to talk about their roles and what happened. How did the MBA help them? And what kind of return on investment can you expect? And was it worth it? And all those good things. So that'll be another great talk, as well as featuring Professor Tim Johnson and Professor Jon Thompson talked about Tim, teaching a public policy class. And he's got a great talk. He's done some research on AI. So that'll be another interesting talk from a professor. So we really appreciate you guys coming to these. We encourage students that are looking at getting their MBA. If you're shopping around and looking at different universities, Willamette University is ranked #1 in the state of Oregon. It's a fantastic place. Our alums can tell the story, and that'll be the next webinar will be a great one to attend. And then we also have a couple of dates coming up in August where we're going to be doing some happy hours where we invite prospective students to come out and meet some current students, meet some faculty, meet some different people in the program. Maybe alums will be there as well. We're going to have one in Salem and one in Portland. Those are going to be in August 3rd. We'll be in Portland, and August 10th we'll be in Salem. So stay tuned. We'll be sending info on that as well. And then we just wanted to open this up now at this point to any questions. I think you can take the slides down, Alex. And if there's any questions, and it doesn't just have to be for the admissions team, if there's questions for Professor Thompson, by all means, this is a great time to go ahead and ask those. So we'll open it up. So Greg or Annie or anyone who has questions.
So I was a little curious. I do work full time, but I'm in a sweet spot with my children. My children are old enough they don't need me. My parents are young enough they don't need me. So what, on average, I know this is a very difficult question, but on average, outside of the classroom time, what would you say is a good commitment to kind of try and think about how to schedule in?
Right. And so who wants to, do you guys want me, the oldest one, to answer this? Are you asking a specific person that you've talked to? Because we have somebody right now in the program, Nate Nagy, and he could probably answer this.
Oh, that would be great if Nate would answer.
Yeah, I think that question is really tough to answer. But I'll kind of talk to you a little bit about how I go through it. I think, like Tony mentioned a little bit before, it's about what's your new routine going to look like when you get back into school. It's not that you can't do it. It's just you gotta, I'm not able to watch all the Detroit Lion games on Sunday that I wanted to. I'm studying instead, right? So I like the fact, number one, that a lot of the work that you're going to do is going to be group work and projects together. And I think the toughest thing that I've found with adults is finding that time where you can all get together for a couple of hours during the week that works for everybody, whether it's on Zoom, which we've done before, or in person over at Atkinson. That's the toughest part, is getting everybody in one room after class together. But I would say my last semester, the homework was minimal because one of my classes was set up where all the work, if you got it done, was done in that class. And there was just some reading during the week. This semester's a little bit different. I'll spend a few hours during the week to get my corporate finance homework done, and in global management. I've got to once a week type a little 2-page case that takes, I've got to read that chapter and dive in. And so total for me, I'm spending, 5 to 7 hours during the week, chopped up strategically. And for me personally, this semester, I'm trying to get everything done earlier in the week. Like my Wednesdays and Thursdays are my homework days, so I can spend a little bit more time on the weekends. Now that doesn't always happen. So some semesters will be more than others, but it's not like every waking moment of free time you have, if you're not in school or going to work, is going to be spent doing homework. Some semesters are going to be different, but it's definitely manageable.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. That's often a question we get as well. How much time is it actually going to take? And so, yeah, I think it varies for everybody, right? I mean, Nate probably has, a little different answer than what Alex would have, or what Marley would have, or what I would have. And so it's, since I had the young children, I was very much in cram mode, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights. That was, all of us who had young kids in my cohort, that's when we met, and there was nights where it was late nights, but that's the way it was. And it worked best for us because of our schedules. And I think, like Nate said, it'll really depend on how that works for you and the people that you lean on in the program as well.
Makes sense. I do have a less serious question, because I've talked to a couple people so far, and everybody is quick to talk about you get dinner. So like, what is dinner during class? Like, I'm very curious, like, what is an example of a dinner?
Yeah, and I'll let both, I think Alex and Nate, you guys should both talk about it, because we have cohorts in Salem as well as in Portland. So I'll let you guys both answer that.
Yeah, so I'll start it off. Here in the Portland Center, we have catered meals by, I believe the name of the restaurant is Fuego. Chef Megan at Fuego in Clackamas. They provide our evening dinners. There's usually some sort of salad to begin with, right? It's kind of like serve yourself, or they will have someone there serving, met with some sort of protein. There's often chicken, fish, a taco bar. Those are popular options, tikka masala. Like, it can vary quite a bit. And then usually some sort of accompanying dessert, a custard, muffin, cake, and then always a full stocked fridge with drinks for individuals. So they're quite tasty dinners. There's usually more than enough to go around. So in that regard, we're treated very, very nicely. And of course, we adhere to the dietary restrictions, right? If someone has these restrictions of any sort, just please feel free to pass those along, and we can accommodate accordingly here at the Portland Center. So that's our experience.
Yeah, and here in Salem, it works a little bit differently this summer, because Willamette University undergraduate does not offer summer courses. We have catered dinners brought in through Bon Appetit, which is the main service provider for our university. Last night we had chicken tortellini, there's a salad, there's grilled vegetables, and then there's all the gluten-free stuff or vegetarian stuff if people want that too. So a good range of options. They've got a big pot of coffee and sodas and kind of everything anywhere in between. And then when school is in session in fall and spring semester, we'll take that 30-minute break and walk right across the street to the cafeteria. And then your options open up even more. Like every night they've got pizza, so I've got to be careful. But there's salad, and they have 2 or 3 different entrees as well. But we'll actually walk over to the cafeteria in the evening, in the fall and in the spring.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Yeah, another great question. Food. We get that quite a bit. And that's one of the perks of the program, is that our costs include the food, obviously. And we think that's a fantastic perk, because we provide your books, we provide the meals. So really, when you get there, it is nice. So when you are busy as a professional, that you can really concentrate on class. You don't have to worry about food. You don't have to be worried about getting hungry. Like Nate said, there's coffee there, there's things there. So that's really a nice perk for the program, definitely.
And Tony, can I just elaborate on that just a tiny bit? And, basically what Tony said, I think is really important. When you get your scholarship and you find out what each semester is going to look like, that tuition rate's locked in. And once again, Tony said it's all inclusive. There's no hidden fees. There's no, well, why am I paying this all of a sudden? It covers dinners, it covers books. And so we think that's really important, where you know what every semester is going to look like, so there aren't any surprises, right? And so people our age don't like surprises. And that's the beauty of the program, but it's really truly an all-inclusive deal, which is nice.
Nice.
Yeah. Other questions by anybody? And Annie, if you've got another one, that's fine too.
No, those were my two big ones. This was a great presentation.
Well,
I'm
good.
excited. I'm excited. I have a lot of support at work too, which is really nice. I have a boss who's very supportive. He's already carved out 5 hours of my work week for study. So that's pretty nice.
That's fantastic. And that is a big thing. If you have support at work, you have support at home, that's huge. That's going to help propel you through the program. So no, we're go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, last thing I'll say too, and that brings up a good point. I think our professors are extremely accessible, like Marley said. Tony's texting back and forth at 2 a.m. with his data professor about questions, and we're going back and forth. That part's nice, but they also understand that we're working professionals. Not only is the material presented in that way where it's usable, and really the next day at work you can use a lot of those things you learned in class, but they also understand the fact that you have a job and other things going on as well. So I think that's a good part of the program. And people, for example, might have to miss a class because they have a trade show to go to in Baltimore. Well, there's that option there's that hybrid option where those classes are going to be recorded and you will be able to Zoom in. You just have to communicate with your professor, but there is that option. It's not an online program, but they understand things come up. And so that's really nice for me and for people in my cohort so far.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. So I know, is it Rosalie? I know that we had a late guest just join us. We're kind of wrapping things up here, but not to fret. We did record this webinar, and we have one more coming up in July. And I don't mean to cut us all off here, but Rosalie, if you have any questions, or if there's any other questions here, before we kind of end this webinar. And if not, Professor Thompson, any last words of wisdom?
You should have asked, are there any at all, not any last ones, because that implies that I started out with words of wisdom. So I don't know. No, thank you very much. And as far as it goes in terms of being a professor who's trying to be available, if you do have any questions, Tony, or do they get like my email or something? Or
yes, okay. I can provide your
Okay.
email to all the guests.
Thank you very much.
You betcha. So well, that's going to kind of conclude webinar number 2. Again, we have our 3rd webinar. This recording will go out, so if you missed it or you were late, it's okay. You're going to get the recording. We have one more webinar after this. You'll have our contact information, so you can also send out questions, comments, remarks, things like that. But we really appreciate it. Looking forward to another great webinar coming up July 19th. And again, thank you everyone for being here. We appreciate it.